The advancements in healthcare have meant that many South Africans will outlive their money. So we look at realistic strategies for those who are planning for retirement. Still with us in studio, Tandisizwe Mahlutshana. Joining us at the desk, Michelle Human, legal marketing specialist at Liberty Retail. And joining us from our Cape Town studios, Mark Elliot, senior financial planner at Quattro Finance. Mark, it seems that you sent us the weather here in Johannesburg. It's a rainy day here in Johannesburg today. But Michelle, I'll start off with you. Tell us about your views right now on the biggest mistakes people tend to make right now whilst planning for their retirement. What's the most common mistake?
Well, there's definitely a big one that comes to mind straight away, and that is when people are changing jobs, either voluntarily or through retrenchment, that they cash in their pension or provident funds, and suddenly that they've got this big cash windfall, and they're buying cars and they're going on holidays and they're paying off the credit card. But what they don't realize is that that money was actually there for retirement savings, and they are still going to need it at some point in time. So they're using it to fulfill a very short-term goal without seeing the bigger picture and the long-term goals that they should be working towards.
It's a big problem, because I suppose you have to have those investments having time in the market, and really it's about that time horizon.
Yeah, I mean, I think the mistakes, look, I think there are a lot of things. Retrenchment is not fun for anybody to go through, and I think that what you do find is that, it's a stressful period, and suddenly you get presented with money and you think, all right, look, I'm going to splurge a little bit on it now, but then I'm going to go back and I'll get serious about retirement. But you forget the impact of compounding. I mean, it takes a long time. Look at paying off your house as an example. You don't feel it until you've paid off 7, 8, 9, 10 years where you start actually getting into the capital. The problem with as soon as you cash in or you run up your access bond again is that you've undone all of that hard work and you're losing all of the benefits. And it's exactly the same, I think, with the retirement side of things, where you've made the effort, you've done the early hard yards, and you go and undo that again. I
suppose there's also the question of how much of our income we should be putting towards our retirement. I mean, I don't know, Tandisizwe, you have any ideas on that? Because it's always the tough one. It's about pleasure now, as opposed to the gains later on.
Well, I mean, statistics out there, I think, are that you have to target at least 75% of your income replacement ratio, which really goes to about between 15 to 25% of your salary that you have to save on a monthly basis. But again, when you then find yourself in that bad position of either having to change jobs or being retrenched, it then takes you longer to be able to make up for that shortfall. As a result, you may have to, in some stages, have to save up 45% to 50% of your salary. Also having your normal monthly credits that you have to pay for, which to me then means that the only thing that you have, or the other option that you have, is to work for as long as you can, or work longer, extend your work days after retirement.
Yeah. Mark, what's the kind of rule of thumb at the moment when it comes to saving for retirement? We have discussed this before, but what are your views on the percentage of your income you should be putting away?
Well, look, as Tandisizwe has mentioned, 15% is the rule of thumb that most people live by. But in the long term, it's best to start saving as early as possible. Guys in their 20s and 30s don't realize the impact of compound interest going forward. And as you can put it away as much as you possibly can now. Things like looking into inflation and those kind of things that you need to target, and also the expenses of products going forward. When people are older, they need to take that into consideration when they're doing their financial plan. And it's easier said than done to put away X amount every month. But if you instill disciplines pre-retirement, and you focus on the long term, because people are living for longer, and guys need to understand that retirement is at 65, but could possibly, with modern medicine, live to past 100 years old. So they really have to make those kind of preparations long beforehand, before the retirement years start.
Don't necessarily have to retire at 65 though, and hopefully some of us are strong and healthy enough to work beyond that, but that also brings up the importance of looking after your health, and the importance of health during these years prior to retirement, because the cost of that post-retirement can be exorbitant.
Definitely. And I think when planning for retirement, clients need to have a look and say, okay, what is my ideal age that I would like to retire at, and is that realistic? Because a lot of us have got in our minds that, okay, by 60, 65, we need to be retired. But what are other options in terms of that? Maybe we could scale down and reduce income, but still have additional income coming in. And how many paydays have we got until we reach retirement age? So realistically, take a client age 40 who's going to retire at age 60. He's only got to 20 years, which is 240 paydays left to save for his retirement. And once you start putting that into perspective for clients, and they realize, well, I could live to 75, 80, 85, how many paydays do I actually have to provide for retirement income? So I think it's important for clients to look at that and say, you know, times have changed. We're not all retiring at 60 and dead by 70. A lot of us are going to be living into our hundreds.
Yeah, I mean, I think Mark touched on something just off air. There was lifestyle, and I think that the idea that you've got, you know, you can actually look after your health in your 30s. You don't. I mean, I'm taking the cliche of the journalist who drinks too much, but I mean, we do. We lead high impact lives these days. There are a lot of programs that do incentivize us to look after our health, and I think that what Mark said there, pre-retirement and then going post-retirement, it's actually one of those. It's one of those soft savings that you can do if you actually do look after yourself to get you to that period and then post that period as well, because medical expenses are rising at rapid rates, and I think that it's something that will catch you up.
And it certainly is being incentivized by healthcare providers these days.
Correct.
Yeah. Mark, let's talk about the various kind of assets you can be looking at from a kind of asset planning perspective right now. I mean, what are your thoughts on property, assets, liquid versus non-liquid assets, thinking about your investment portfolio for retirement right now?
Well, you know, it's always depending on how late you're going to leave it, but ideally if you're younger, you can have more equity exposure in your portfolio because you've got the legs or the time to run with it. But, you know, it becomes a bit of a problem when you have left it a bit later to your 40s and your 50s. Then, you know, you've got problems when you have Regulation 28 only allows you 25% equity exposure in those portfolios. So you've got to think outside the box a little to say, guys, look, I have left a little late, but it's not the end of the world. You know, I'd like to encourage people to say, even though if your nest egg is not looking like you're going to make it, but you can also do things like learn a trade, if you enjoy tinkering with cars or baking or those kind of things, to do later post-retirement to support your pre-retirement planning and to have that whole strategy put together. Yes, the markets can do things for your money, but it's not a miracle cure. You need to have to put in the disciplines, like I said earlier, and instill those disciplines so you keep it's a continual day-to-day investment that you're making financially, but also within yourself. So there's two aspects of it the whole time that you're working together. Yeah, like I said, the markets can do X amount, but you need to rely on earlier starting and the assets or compound interest working in your favor in the long run.
Mark, just one question. Obviously, to government, it's a major concern that we have such a low savings rate. What are some of the, if any, some of the incentives that you think government has introduced, to encourage people to save?
Well, you know, it's fantastic what government is actually doing for guys, because, you know, you do get up to about 15%. Depending on, you need to talk to your financial planner, but there are tax incentives for products like retirement annuities, and going forward into your pre-retirement years, you do get tax rebates. And what a lot of guys aren't utilizing is that in the UK and the US, tax incentives are exploited on a daily basis to maximize your growth. In South Africa, utilizing a product like an RA, which we know in the past have been looked down on because of the high costings, but those costs have come down dramatically over the years. And SARS themselves are giving great percentages and paybacks at the end of their financial year to guys using RAs, to assist you. And by utilizing these kind of products, you can help, or SARS can help you actually put money in your bank account for your retirement years by paying tax now and claiming it back at the end of each financial year.
And they also penalise you tapping into your savings. So that's also the other end of this discussion. And
we've seen quite a few moves in the last while to try and reform the retirement industry as such. And that's definitely a focus that they have at the moment, to say, here are the incentives to save your money. But however, if you do decide that you hit hard times and you are retrenched, for example, and you do take a benefit earlier than you should, then these are going to be the consequences for you. And then there will be a tax penalty or a tax implication for you. So I think Mark's hit on two really, really important things there, and that is, don't leave it to the last minute. You can't suddenly expect to start saving for your retirement at the age of 50. and consult with your financial planner, and why not use the incentives that are there for you?
I think what you really drew home there was that analogy of you could live for 35 years post 65, and between 45 and 65 you've only got 204 paydays to provide for that. Let's just go back to the issue around property. I mean, do you think it's essential to have a property to be able to have a stable asset, a very kind of obvious asset that you can rely on?
I think it's important to have your asset, to know that as part of my retirement plan, this is where I'm going to be living, and that asset is completely paid off. You can always use it as a later stage for income generation if you really need to, and then to have a very balanced portfolio. And to do that, you're going to need to sit down with a financial advisor and say, this is my time horizon. You know, this is how many years I've still got until retirement, or this is my risk appetite. You know, I'm the type of investor that doesn't mind a few ups and downs, so we can have more equity exposure. I've got the time to do that. And then you need to construct a portfolio around that, and every client's portfolio is going to look differently.
Yeah, I mean, I think my one comment there, and I know property often gets brought up, is I think you need to understand the cost of property, because I think that while it sounds great that it's an asset, and I mean, I have this argument often, I often say your primary residence is not an asset unless you've been either paid for it in cash or you've got it incredibly cheap. What it is, I do believe, is a good way to actually save, because I think that it's a forced saving in a roundabout way. Yes, it's expensive, you know, you're paying it off over 20 years, but it has taught you to put money away each time. And while it doesn't necessarily give you a return immediately, it does become a form of savings vehicle. And when you get to 50 and your kids are out of home and you scale down, you have developed some kind of nest egg that should have at least kept pace with inflation. But I do, you know, I become quite cynical when people say that that property is necessarily an asset for retirement. I think you've got to very quickly work out the cost of that financing for it.
Yeah. So how do we kind of take a look at, there's various stages obviously. I mean, you're in your 30s and you're starting to save, very different to someone in their 50s. So someone in their 30s has a lot of time on their side. It's an equity story, I assume. Tell us your view on 30 versus, say, someone who's in their 50s.
Well, I think if you look at somebody in their 30s, they're generally starting out in life. They maybe have a qualification, they may be getting married, they may be having kids, and that's a very expensive phase of life. They're not necessarily going to have the same amount of cash to put away as somebody who's maybe in their late 40s and 50s. So you'll see that over the period of time and during the different life stages, people's priorities change and they may have different needs. So possibly they start contributing to a retirement annuity at that point in time, they maximize their tax benefits, they maybe start putting some money away towards education and things like that. As they get older and they move into their 40s, 50s, the kids have left home, they don't have those kind of expenses, you can see them accelerating their retirement savings. But then, of course, you've lost out on the compound interest and the compound growth over that period. So that's why it needs to be something that's done over your entire lifetime.